You're muted when you join. You'll have to unmute yourself.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, sure can.
How you been?
Good. How are you, man?
Hanging. No sense complaining.
I think you're the first 2 week in a row attendee.
Hey, do I get a gold star?
Yeah, you get the gold star.
Well, I've been thinking about our call from last week.
Yeah,
Since I was thinking of calling you directly, so since it's just you and we'll talk about it. Um, I'm a real estate guy. I think
yeah.
I told you that. And real estate is in a very unique situation right now.
To say the least.
Because with the Fed raising rates, it's rolling over. With COVID, the commercial real estate market tanked. With the economy tanking, especially real estate, churches and schools, now that, my granddaughter got a Harvard law degree, half of which online.
Right.
So the whole myth about you being able to get an education online is out the window.
Yeah,
So specialty real estate like schools and churches and cafeteria, they're hurting.
absolutely.
But in my lifetime, it's been the best inflationary hedge ever.
Right.
So when I first got involved in this stuff, I followed Digibyte. Are you familiar with that program?
I don't think I am.
Okay, the founder is a guy named Jared Tate.
Okay.
I ran into his marketing manager. I got online and met her. She ended up moving from Wilmington, South Carolina to Pittsburgh because she wanted her daughter to go to Carnegie Mellon. So I met her and I did a white paper on how Digibyte could be used in the real estate business. But
Right.
at the time, I thought I was thinking traditional corporate structures. And these blockchain projects like Threefold, they're not. That's not a company. There's nobody.
Right.
We're. It's sort of like a. I don't want to call it a cult. It's more like a nonprofit organization without the 501c paperwork.
Right. Absolutely. It's definitely more of a community project, kind of a living entity almost in itself
Yeah.
versus a corporation.
So I've been thinking about Threefold, and I thought my idea last week. By the way, if you want to get more attendance on these, call it technical and idea or an ideation workshop where people talk about their ideas. I think we'll get more people on.
Yeah, I've actually that's something I've thought about a lot because I definitely think that's a challenge is kind of saying what it is and what it isn't, and people kind of not coming because think it's one thing when it's really kind of an open forum.
Yeah, and they think it's technical.
Yeah,
And I'm telling you, my head gets blown by the technical aspects of this whole movement.
yeah,
Okay,
yeah. I've been
but
there.
I
That's where I
I bet
started.
I love it. I mean, it's such a I love the whole blockchain concept, right? So I wrote this white paper and I sent it to Jared Tate's right hand man. And basically, what I used in it was I used the depreciation of the dollar over time. And my idea was let's raise some money, let's buy a building, and I'll convert it from a fiat managed piece of real estate to a blockchain based piece.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the problem was there was nobody to even look at that. There's another gentleman. Hi, Marius. So that sort of led me to. And then I got over the weekend. I got a little note. My grandson plays hockey, and they're doing a fundraiser. And I looked at it, and I thought they're announcing it on Facebook. They're trying to raise a very small amount of money, right? 35 to 50 bucks per person kind of thing. And I thought, this is something else Threefold could build.
Yeah,
In other words, we're limited. We have to send checks and money orders. We have to use the fiat system to send that money over.
right, absolutely.
So I thought if Threefold could have a use case somewhere where very small, remember, they're trying to go from the World Wide Web down to a local community in in countries where there's no internet access, right? So if we could have a platform that would make it easier for local communities to raise small amounts of money and push that out beyond their local jurisdiction, you'd have a new mousetrap.
Okay, so just to kind of recap what I think I'm understanding is kind of the idea of having, kind of similar to kind of like the way we would deploy an applet, something, that's one click simple, where it sets up a funding source where they can crowdsource funding. It aggregates that funding and allows them to use that locally in a blockchain function, so with like TFT, but also allows them to do fundraising on a bigger basis
Right. And at
across the
the
world.
end of it, we have to be able to send it back out into fiat where they can spend it in the United States,
Yeah.
where
So
they'll understand it, you know?
that's a great concept, and I think we'll have a lot of individual parts of that that belong to different parts of grid ownership that can come together to put that together. Having one application that does that all in once gets dangerously close to becoming a bank and putting yourself in the regulatory space for a bank, which
Okay,
is something you want to be really careful with when you start talking about exchanging funds
sure.
between fiat and crypto. Obviously, that's something that, as the foundation and the applications they build, they have to be careful with that. But I think what you're talking about is something that would be a great solution provider concept for a company that does fundraising, right? So basically, they're able to create, an F list as well as like some Terraform infrastructure. And then basically, when they sell, their service package of, hey, we'll give you this fundraising package, it can deploy all of those resources needed for that local area on the grid automatically using their pre-built structure, using things like NixOS or Ansible or something like that.
Hmm.
Reconfigure that stuff, and then they can have that package as a pre-built thing where they can sell it through a web interface in fiat, and then they can handle, the fundraising through each of those different cryptocurrencies, aggregating those funds and bringing together and giving them back to that organization in fiat. I definitely think that's something the grid could do. Um, but I think it's something that would be a great solution provider concept, and that's something where a guy like you that's written a white paper before and has familiarity with the resources and what's needed and what's not needed in the real estate industry, coming together and writing something like that for Threefold, because Threefold can be an investment vehicle where you can turn each house that you own into an internet capacity generator that generates funds through threefold farming in addition to your rent. And that's kind of where we get into the idea of like the miniature decentralized data centers, right? Because at that point, if everybody's house is a miniature generator of internet capacity, that's how you ultimately address that huge problem of not having enough capacity in the world. Is we'll never have
Yeah.
enough data centers. We need every house to be a data center, and that's where Threefold kind of is heading towards.
Okay. Interesting stuff.
Hi, Marius. I saw you came in next. Looks like you're talking, but you're muted. Everyone's muted when you join, so you'll have to unmute yourself.
Alt A, right?
Okay. Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes. Hi, Marius.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Hi. Okay. Can I ask something?
Yeah,
I'm not
absolutely.
very technical. I'm not very technical at all. So I'm a farmer myself. But um, would it be possible, because everything we are talking about decentralized stuff, okay,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah,
not
absolutely.
enough capacity. Would it be possible? Because I'm thinking, how can we bring what do you call utilization to the network? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm thinking because I'm just using Netflix, YouTube with my internet and other bits and pieces. How are we gonna tap into that?
So I think that's something, a post I actually just put out last night talking about running desktop environments on the grid, where someone could actually host, something similar to basically a cloud environment that functions the same way like your home computer would or your laptop, something like that. Could
Yeah,
definitely address those people. So say you're working at home and you want to do a project that needs a lot more, processor and memory than is what you have in your local machine. You could deploy a VM on the grid and actually use that through remote desktop to do those things. And that's like that post I made last night has a tutorial on how you can do that for Linux. We don't have a Windows or Mac OS solution on the grid yet, but for Linux you can actually get some desktop environments going.
okay, that's cool.
I can actually should be able to pull one up here. Let's see here. So this is, I'm using the Chrome Remote Desktop extension. It just provides a very easy user-friendly access portal for this. But so this is actually a deployment running on the grid, and then I'm able to just remote into it. Um, and you'll see it load up here. And this is the same, Linux Ubuntu environment that you would be familiar with. The performance is really solid. You get, great video quality. Hold on, lots of authentication
Oh,
here.
cool.
Do all the authentications. Huh. I can't seem to get this window to go away. It's working, but this window's interesting. Oh yeah, something that I just came up with. But yeah, you can come in here. Typically you'd be able to use your applications, but I think I'm having an issue with trying to screen share while I'm remoting into another computer. So
Okay, so basically, I need to run it myself, like if I want to use the grid. Is it?
yeah, so I mean the grid is just, storage, network, compute, resources. So in the same way
Yeah,
that like if you wanted to use AWS or the Amazon cloud, you would need some sort of software that you wanted to host on the cloud, correct? It's
yeah.
it's the same way with the grid. The grid is essentially the cloud. So the cloud itself doesn't do anything. It's just the cloud. You have to tell it what to do.
I know, but look, Drew, I know it's a crazy idea, okay? But again, probably I'm wrong with my idea.
There are no crazy ideas.
Yeah, absolutely not.
Okay, wait for the crazy idea. So, as I said, imagine I'm using Netflix, YouTube, whatever internet. I use quite a lot, yeah, all day. What I was thinking, can the grid, because for example, let's say Netflix or YouTube, they have the data centers probably in centralized places, isn't it? Like in just would they be would it be possible for them to use our capacity in every single house?
Yeah, so I mean, if something like Netflix wanted to, have a place that they could, increase their storage size or add additional processor or memory usage, they could create VMs and connect them into their existing infrastructure that would offload work onto them. I'm obviously not familiar with how their software
Yeah,
infrastructure works, but at the same basis, a grid VM is just an Ubuntu server or, whatever OS you install on it. So it can integrate with any of the existing clouds. They could expand their resources to use the grid. Absolutely.
because I think that's a like that would be ideally, isn't it?
Yeah. So that's kind of the whole concept. Right now, I think we've done a disservice to the grid by having the applets be such a focus over kind of the whole capability of the grid because you get this kind of closed-in mindset where you see the grid as being like, oh, I can deploy an algorand node, or oh, I can set up this one specific tool like CapRover or PeerTube, when really the grid it can really do anything. So big companies, everybody could use the grid to expand their capacity, and
And I know, yeah, go on.
those companies are really the ones that are the perfect market as well because they have those um, kind of existing resources in place and the software developers that are building their infrastructure as it is and they're doing that development. Those are the perfect people to use the grid because they're going to have the ability to really jump in and you know tune the grid to what they need and expand their resources. And that's kind of the gap we have right now is finding a way to really attract those people that have that software development capability to make the grid go from a structure of resources that's available to a structure of resources that's in use and being utilized.
Yeah, because at the moment it's just Zonaris, isn't it? Mainly
Yeah, I'm
what's
not.
using the network, right?
Yeah, I'm not familiar with any other like major operations that are functioning on the grid right now. I just saw Scott come in. Maybe he could add to that if he knows of any other solutions providers that might be actually providing kind of active services on the grid right now.
Recording in progress.
That's a good question. I'm not aware of anyone else, offering a service where people pay for fiat and then, good capacity is consumed on the other end, anything like that. to be honest, we don't really know the majority of users on the grid who they are, so it's somewhat of a mystery. Um,
That is one of the challenges of decentralization.
yeah, although as I'm saying that, I'm realizing there's a small amount of data that becomes available about workloads to the public. It's I think it's what you name your workload, or it's not actually the F list. So I've only poked at this a couple of times, so it's kind of fuzzy. But this could be a fun project to go and try and see, what kind of F lists or what kind of solutions or what people are calling them. One thing I can say is pre-search is a major use case that individuals are using. So that's been the case for a while.
Yeah, I think that's a great example. Most of your pre-search infrastructure that's existing in the world obviously doesn't exist on the Threefold grid, but by having the applet that takes that code and conforms it into a fashion that it deploys on the grid, we're able to integrate those grid resources with the rest of that infrastructure, no matter where else it's hosted. So the grid really functions in the same ways. It's just got a little bit different of a language to it.
Cool.
William, welcome to the call. I saw you come in. Andreas, I think, is probably.
Yeah, hi, thanks for your welcome words.
Is there anybody else that has any additional questions at this point?
Yeah, can we go back to the fundraising issue?
Yeah. So for those that came in after we had that discussion, City Creek was talking about how could someone use the grid to kind of enable crypto payments to be both fundraised locally and kind of on a bigger scale across the world. And we were discussing how a solutions provider could actually develop a set of software resources, where it creates that payment portal for a user to be able to basically set up a website essentially that says, hey, you can come here, we take donations in this, and then those servers would be able to be hosted on the grid. And then that solutions provider could provide that service to them, to their customers for fiat. And theoretically, if that solutions provider wanted to, they could also collect all of those crypto donations and output that into a fiat for their customer. But that's definitely getting into a very involved business concept on top of the grid as well. I mean, that definitely goes beyond just the idea of hardware storage network.
Wouldn't that be a case, especially when the price of TFT would become more stable? Because now being so it fluctuates quite a lot. How does it work?
So one of the big reasons we see so much fluctuation, and especially let's not hide it, when we say fluctuation we mean downward dropping. We don't see a whole lot of ups, and that's because it's a function of supply and demand, right? So when the coin value goes down, it means that there's more coins for sale than people want to buy, which means that people are able to continually offer lower and lower prices for the purchase of those coins. So something, where if we had somebody doing something like this and taking donations in TFT, it would require people to buy TFT, which increases the demand, which offsets how much is being sold. And then your price goes up, and to market with a healthy demand above what's being sold is what ultimately makes the coin price higher. This is why you'll often see me kind of pushing back against any programs that try to fix the coin price by anything but creating real demand, and that's because anything else is kind of just a band-aid.
But at the moment, it's very unstable, isn't it?
So yeah, that's a function of liquidity. So basically, what that means is how much TFT can be bought or sold before it impacts the price of the coin. And that's a topic that I'm not super expert in. But what I can say is that it's unstable because you've got, just as an example, I'm not saying this is an accurate number, but you've got $80,000 in liquidity here. Somebody sells $2,000 in TFT, that's going to make an impact to the market. As that liquidity pool gets bigger and bigger, that makes the market more and more stable, where you're not seeing so much of the rising and falls when you buy and sell coins, and people get rewarded for providing to that liquidity pool by some transaction fees that happen with buying and selling, but that's definitely getting into some pretty deep crypto concepts.
It's funny though, there was a period of time where people in the community were joking that TFT was more stable than some stable coins because it was very flatline, at least in dollar terms, for a certain period of time.
Yeah,
So
and if you take the overlays of what's happened to Bitcoin and Ethereum for the entire crypto winter, and you overlay them against percentage changes in TFT, I mean, a lot of times we do outperform other coins on not falling apart as bad.
It's the key is getting the use cases. We have to find some use cases,
Yeah,
and the sooner we do that, the more stable it'll become.
yeah,
And
absolutely.
it'll grow like you can't imagine. But until we get some use cases going, our own, I think our own, rather than depending on the farmers to sell their capacity or anything like that. If we could find a single use case that
Well,
has tremendous
that's
potential.
I don't know if you came to the community call that happened last week, the kind of the devs call. But there's actually a project right now. They're going to be setting up Threefold Grid Services, which is going to be kind of a commercial arm of the project where they're going to be providing hosting services on the grid for fiat. So people will actually be able to deploy workloads paid directly in fiat and receive kind of that virtual private server experience that they're familiar with from other cloud hosts. And
That's great. That's great. I think that'll fly.
yeah, so I think that's something, I think we heard a lot of that feedback for a long time that people needed to see it work. We wanted everyone to build on top of the grid, but there wasn't really great solid examples of how to do that yet, and I think that's coming. The 3.8 update, I know it's getting pretty close. If you check out GitHub and look at the projects, it's just continually getting updated closer and closer. And then with the solution provider stuff that's coming in that update, and the addition of a lot of the just stuff that's coming in the coming months, I think we'll start to see some really big opportunity for people to not only use the grid but also actually create businesses that use the capacity of the grid to provide real services in the world.
That's great. That's what we need. When will that be ready?
Scott, do you know when 3.8 is ready? The rest of that's kind of I can't tell you when we'll be able to provide real services. But
How do I follow that, Drew? The farmer chat's great, but it covers so many things. You have to spend hours and hours and hours and get into things that newbies want to talk about that I don't want to talk about. So I
yeah,
sort of depend on the app. I kind of check the app every couple days, but the app doesn't get updated too often at all.
Yeah, I think the forums is a great place, reading through the forums, but really to get solid, your minute by minute updates, reading on GitHub and looking at what's updated in repos is definitely the most up to date, but that's definitely getting into probably where you're going to want to have some tech experience to read there. So I'd probably say the forums is the best place to stay up to date.
Okay.
I'd also suggest the announcement channel on Telegram. That's a better balance.
I don't even know if I joined that. I got to check that out. Thanks, Scott.
Yeah, I can pop the link into the chat here on Zoom. And then we also send an email newsletter that condenses the major updates.
Yeah, I get the update emails.
You get the emails, okay.
Yeah. I don't always have time to read them. They seem to come out quite frequently.
I think definitely lately we've been seeing a pretty good swarm of updates.
Yeah. I'm thinking it used to be a weekly update. Now it's like every 4 hours.
That's pretty awesome. There's been a lot of buzz lately
Good.
in the community,
Yeah,
and lots
I love it.
of people making
Seeing it.
stuff.
Sure. Yeah, it's a good sign.
But as for the question, when will it be ready? I don't know. It'll be ready when it's ready. We talked to the developers. We said, hey, we want to put this thing together, and they said, oh yeah, no problem. A lot of what's needed to make this work has already been built for things like the Mastodon weblet. When it comes to software development, there's always unexpected things that come up. Like it always takes longer than you expect, even when you anticipate that it's going to take longer than you expect. So we're still in the early phase of just getting together what this is going to look like. So
Okay,
as soon as we have an idea about that, can share something.
excellent.
And we hope that so we'll be releasing it as open source. So unlike Zonaris, who has developed something proprietary, which is of course fine. That's something they're of course welcome to do. But we'll be, like everything else that Threefold developed, we'll be open sourcing our commercial solution providers. So the idea is giving kind of the simplest template that we can for anyone who wants to come along and basically copy this and put some money into marketing and find their own customers and run a service like this. So this will be something that can replicate easily, and hopefully people will take it up and go use this opportunity for themselves too.
So I wanted to bounce back. Earlier, Marius asked about use cases for kind of the average user, and I was going to show off this desktop environment, and then it completely decided not to work for me. But now I've got it back up here. So this is actually a grid deployment. I'm using the Chrome Remote Desktop extension, which makes kind of the setup easy. There's ways to do this without using Chrome. I know that going in and creating a Google account as part of the tutorial on how to use the decentralized internet is probably not the most palatable thing. But that's just an example of what's possible as we can make some more decentralized apps for this. But what's really cool about this is I'm running a full desktop environment here. There's no nested virtualization. This is running on just the VM itself. But then I could actually use this just as my regular functional computer, and browse the web. You can, make a Word document, whatever else, and this is stored in the cloud. So this is something where you'd be able to access this from, anywhere you're at. So if you're somebody that travels, you're somebody that just wants to have a place where you can set up, your private workspace, but have it accessible from everywhere, you could deploy that on the cloud or deploy that on the grid and then just access it from anywhere. But yeah, and this has all the same functionality as your regular Ubuntu, and I'm actually using this live, so you can tell it's not super laggy. I'm actually getting a little more lag, I think, because I'm at about 99 CPU usage from running 2 streams. But so that's definitely something that as we start to expand these functionalities, we'll start to see more use cases that are everyday user friendly. Right now, I'd say we're definitely more web host environment friendly.
Cool.
That should work in any Chromium-based browser, right?
So I believe the remote desktop extension does exist in the base Chromium as well, which I believe is open source. I haven't gotten into that yet, but because I was actually my next kind of step with that, I was going to try to integrate Slim as the display manager and try to cut down on the resource usage there quite a bit. Because using GNOME, it's definitely dragging it down. But like that VM, well, it's only a 4-core, 4 gig of RAM VM, and it's still, as an example I shared last night, I was able to, open 2 web pages and play Mahjong while browsing the internet, which a little bit of multitasking in a cloud environment is not too bad. So.
It's a cool thing to see. I mean, there's part of me that's like, well,
Yeah,
why not just dual boot Linux at home or install it on a VM or whatever. But there are cool, like I see some cool opportunities for people maybe that have like Chromebooks, right? And they
Absolutely.
want a nice environment, or even like young people, that can't muck with their parents' computers, right? They can get an environment where they can start to play around and maybe write some code or.
Yeah, kind of my concept and where I was heading with this is kind of the cloud home lab. So kind of you've got the idea of those individuals that run, servers at home typically to kind of host different applications and that. But having a place where you can easily throw up and destroy servers to do all kinds of different things just on a temporary basis as you're testing or prototyping, that kind of thing.
So as a non-technical person, is there a way for me to experiment with that now?
Yeah, so I guess it depends on what your definition of non-technical is. Basically, if you're
Yeah.
able to open a Linux terminal and copy and paste commands from a web page into that terminal, you could probably get to this stage. It's not super complicated. I wrote a tutorial last night on the forums for it. I can share that in
I'm,
the chat.
are you familiar with Jeffrey Peterson
I am
and what he
not.
do? Okay, he's a Canadian and he runs a $20 a month Linux. Get rid of the big tech companies. Learn Linux.
Uh-huh.
And I took the course for a while. I was able to get an old Mac running Ubuntu,
Yeah.
but I got lost at the SSH stuff. I mean, once you start, uh,
So I
but I
think
got the desktop to work, and I felt that like that was a win.
what operating system do you normally use?
I use Mac OS, and Windows 10.
Okay, so I would definitely say if you're, I don't use Mac OS, but I use Windows pretty much as my native environment. I've written some tutorials and done videos on how to use PuTTY for the SSH stuff. It makes it far, far easier. It's got, full GUI management in that where it's just point and click. Um, for something like this where I'd really suggest you start, I have a Playground deployers manual that I've posted on GitHub. And I can get you a link. I'll PM you the link to that. And that'll kind of get you through creating your first deployment on the Playground so that you have an accessible Ubuntu VM. And then from there, you're able to just follow the different tutorials I've made. And something like this, it's actually only a 10 command tutorial to set up a Linux environment, desktop environment. So it's not
Okay,
super duper complex.
Drew, I really appreciate your willingness to help here. You're doing great work. Just want you to know I appreciate it.
Absolutely, that's what we're here for. Scott. I have to admit sometimes that a lot of the stuff I do wouldn't be possible if Scott hadn't taught it to me at some point. So
Yeah, I mean the guys at Threefold, I just can't imagine what they've been through over the last couple of decades. I mean, just it's such a monumental task, and to get this close and then get hit with the crypto winter just wasn't
yeah,
good luck at all.
I
You
was
know, you
actually
can, you
I
can
was
get in, you can do everything right, and if you don't get the market on your side, you can get really frustrated. So
yeah, something that I was very shocked to learn recently was that the team is actually almost 100 people within Threefold Tech. So I actually had always thought that it was just a few people, but it's actually a pretty
didn't
big
know that.
organization.
Yeah, I thought it was Scott and maybe 5, 6 other people, but a
Yeah,
hundred people.
I think he said it
Well,
was closer to 75 right now, but
there's a lot of people being let go now. Google just slammed. Lots of programmers are out in the market right now. So might be a good time to recruit.
yeah,
Uh,
I don't want
for
to
help.
I don't want to get into speaking to anything I don't know, but as far as I know, I've never heard of a threefold layoff throughout this winter. So
Nope, nor will you.
No,
No.
we did have to make some cutbacks, but I don't think that involved cutting, at least not any substantial numbers of people from the team. I think there were maybe some folks that like contracts that we scaled back in terms of how many hours there were or something like that. But yeah, we have a pretty large team, but when you think about the scope of what Threefold is building, and for comparison, there's another project in the space I know of, which is they're a crypto exchange front end, and so they just build basically the websites that allow people to interact with this exchange, and they have a similar size team just building that one piece of tech. So considering that we have an operating system, several front-end tools, the Explorer, the Playground, this Terraform plugin that Drew showed us last time, many other components. I mean, if you go and look at our GitHub, I counted up the other day, there's like 20 repositories that have been updated within the last 2 days, so we have a lot of different components that are part of the system, and there's a lot of people working on stuff that that are maybe lurking in the chats, but don't speak up. A lot of our developers are pretty shy, like they probably wouldn't come to something like this. So this, for me, it's really a cool thing to be able to be the bridge, right, between people in the community and our developers, because developers need to focus on writing code, and the fewer distractions they have, the better. And people need answers about how things work and bump into problems. So yeah, I'm happy to be kind of in the middle there. Yeah, it's a tough time for Threefold. Like you said, Chris, we built a lot of tech over a lot of years. I've only been in the project for a couple of years. There's people that have been working on this, even in the company that came before what Threefold is now. There are people building some of the beginnings of this technology. And yeah, right now we're trying to raise some money. We have some very cool opportunities ahead of us. So we're in this very what's like a crux or a
Pivot point, launching stage.
yeah, for sure. And so assuming everything goes okay for the next couple of months, we have some very cool big announcements that will be coming out that should help kind of fuel everything
I
moving
think
forward.
I think the most exciting thing has been seeing some of the more recent, seeing people come into the chat that are already deploying their own solutions and creating new technologies on their own that are actually, building up the grid and getting it to do stuff. I recently had a community member reach out to me a few weeks ago about one of my nodes. He was getting some strange results from a speed test. For some reason, there's one version of the Ookla speed test in the Ubuntu repositories that no matter what you do will claim you have an upload speed of 4 megabits. And we ended up spending about a week chasing my network trying to figure out what was happening, and then I eventually ran the one I've always used, and it was like, yeah, you've got a symmetrical 1 gig. But anyways, what he was telling me is that he was deploying Meson network nodes and some Mysterium nodes and just all kinds of really cool, external projects that he was then able to create this infrastructure. And what's really cool about it is, you look at a project like Mysterium, and for those that don't know, Mysterium is a project that it basically provides a VPN service. So it essentially does what the Planetary Network or our WireGuard network or those things that are like small parts of our project. That entire project is based on doing those things, um, and it does that on a global scale. So they've got a couple 100,000 nodes, and the big difference there is you're able to run a Mysterium node on a computer that does other things. So it's a little bit easier to get those. But what he was able to do is, so in their reward strategy, they offer increased rewards if your node is hosted in an area that has less of those nodes available, because obviously it's beneficial in a VPN network to have local access points. So what he was able to do is, get on the grid, use the Explorer, and say, hey, the highest rewards right now available are in Singapore. And by going and finding a node that is in Singapore, he's able to then go deploy one of these Mysterium nodes in Singapore and capitalize on that location to maximize his resources. And then he's able to follow that demand kind of all over the world using this global network of nodes that's available without a click. And that's just really the concept I think we're seeing come into light. That's really going to change the way things look for the grid in the next coming year.
That's great. Yep, that's the kind of stuff that I think the farmers all need to hear. I don't. Is that information out on the forum, or is it put out on the farmers chat, or how does your average, like my brother's he was very excited about farming, and he was building a pretty big farm down in Virginia, and then he just lost interest. I can't get him. I mean, he's still running his nodes, but to get, like, I invited him to this call, and just to get him back interested in, it's hard to drag him back in. So I think it's important you keep the morale up on the farmers as much as you can, and that kind of news helps. I think there's a
Yeah.
light at the end of the tunnel, kind, you know.
Yeah, so we mentioned that a little earlier. There's definitely a big challenge that comes around when it comes to being able to kind of put a finger on the pulse of the grid, right? Because by design, we don't know what people are doing with their workloads.
That's right.
It's like someone was
Good
asking
point.
me. I had someone bring up to me, and they wanted a solution on the grid that offers push button backup, roll back one day. Um, and it's like, oh man, that would be amazing. But then whoever is responsible for making sure that works is also responsible for taking your data and putting it somewhere on a different node that they choose. So there still has to be a bigger picture there where that user has to be responsible for that configuration. So it's one of those kind of darned if you do, darned if you don't situations, because we want to be able to know what everybody's doing and see these great use cases. And the reality is, if this guy hadn't reached out to me because he happened to be deploying on my farm and having an issue, I would have never in a million years known what those extra 32 IPs that got reserved on my farm were doing.
Right.
I actually remember when this all happened, I messaged Scott that day and I was like, hey, is the dev team like doing something with one of my nodes? Because I just got a block reservation for 32 IP addresses at once. And I was like, that's a whole lot of addresses. And then it was actually just, I think it was like 24 hours later, the person who ended up being the deployer that was using the farm messaged me because they were having some trouble setting stuff up, and we got them up and running. So, yeah, just a fun fact: his nodes used 12 gigabytes or 12 terabytes of traffic last month on my farm. So
That's terrific.
it's pretty cool to see it up and doing stuff. Sometimes I tell Scott, it's like, oh man, the farm's doing a thing. It's like you walk in there, or I'll be sitting in the other room and I'll hear it ramp up, and I'll be like, oh no, did something just restart on its own? And I'll go in there, I'm like, nope, somebody's just, must be farming something because it's at 90% CPU usage again.
It's a good reminder. I periodically will, just ask the community, say if you're building something cool, if you're using the grid, please share on the forum so that other people can see what's going on. And recently, one of our community members has been helping us out a lot. He started a gallery. This is Meek, M-I-K. He started a gallery for deployments. So it's basically a list of all known things that people are running on the grid. So now we have a place where people can list this stuff, and it won't get lost as new posts come in the forum and kind of bury things. So that's a cool development, and yeah, overall, I like the idea, I like the energy. We should be keeping track of this and showing it off for sure.
Yeah, so I'll show you kind of
Very
the
cool.
thread that he was just talking about. This is what. Oh, I'm muted. Anyways, I'll show you this thread that he was just talking about. That Meek, I guess, is how you said he pronounced it. I think I've been calling it
Yeah,
Mick this entire time.
it's short for Mikael. We all had a different idea. A few of us on the team, like how do you say his name? And he's like, oh, it's Mike, it's Meek, it's Mick, whatever you want to say. But yeah, he's French Canadian, and it's Mikael.
For anyone that ever feels bad not knowing how to pronounce people's name in the Threefold group, know that we don't even know how to pronounce each other's names.
Yeah.
So with that being said, he created this thread, and one of the really cool posts, he created one here. He's got his deployment that he's running the AI response bot. For those that don't know, Mech has put out a Telegram bot that is based on a large language model that answers questions about Threefold. So you can go in there and ask it like, hey, I got this error in a deployment, and it'll tell you how to fix it. It's really cool. But then Bert came through, and he actually made a post here that really includes the structure of the team's nodes. So it talks about using, nodes that are running by Binance Chain full nodes, Ethereum nodes, Grafana, this huge software and infrastructure stack that they've built to provide services for the grid. And I don't know if a lot of people realize this, but the grid is partially hosted on the grid. So, things like the bridges for the Binance Smart Chain and the things for like what you're going to be seeing in the upcoming 3.8 update where you're able to get really drilled down stats about how your node is performing. Those are all services that are hosted on the grid. And so our infrastructure is almost self-reproducing at this point.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the things that I I was up last night when I was working on this tutorial for making the desktop environments. I was actually reading a tutorial on how to do it on the Google Cloud Engine, and I was like, hey, I think all of those steps would work on the grid. I went over and tried it, and it worked. So that worked out really easily for me. But one thing I've been thinking about is working on a document that really explains how you can extend the function of your open source software past the confines of just software by using the grid, because the reality is you can develop softwares that are able to actually create deployments through Terraform and do all of this in automated fashions, and something where a project where you've got an application that uses large amounts of resources, theoretically that application could actually deploy a resource processor in the cloud on the grid on its own and use that while the software is running, and that can be a function of the software itself. So basically all the tools that are available, you can just really extend that ability of software outside the confines of just software.
For sure. This is something I love about the grid and would love to see more of, because in traditional cloud environments, they do offer things like API where you can go and use software to reserve more resources, or they have auto scaling solutions. This is common for Kubernetes, where you reserve a Kubernetes cluster, and then if you fill it up with the things that you're launching on that cluster, it'll add a new node automatically, things like this. And on the grid, you're able to build, because everything is open source, all the protocols are open, you're able to build these kinds of features yourself if you'd like to, or some of these things are on the roadmap that the team will build. But because we're an open source project, anyone can jump in and start to add these kinds of features. And if the dev team likes the way that it's done, they might even pull it into the official sources, although it's really necessary for the whole community to benefit. So yeah, I'm excited to see how people will extend the functionality of the grid, do things like auto scaling and self-healing. I wrote a post recently about self-healing, high availability and self-healing concepts, and what those mean in the general cloud world and what they look like on the grid. So if anyone here is looking for some light reading, some more, it's technical, but it's something I think anyone can get into and understand if you want to have a deeper understanding of these kinds of technologies and how the grid, what it supports and what it can support, and kind of where we're at. That's on the forum.
I was very excited when I saw you made that post, because it was something that needed to be made, and I was dreading having to make it. That is a long, complicated post to make. It's not complicated to read, but penning it is not a fun process.
Yeah, I feel like I should come back for like a round 2 on that one, because I began to realize after I posted it, like, okay, it's a tough thing to get succinct. And I started learning about some other technologies. Actually, one I was curious if you had heard of or worked with Drew, which is Cockroach database.
No, I have not.
So this is it's a very cool database, which is distributed and has some self-healing functionalities. Anyway, I was reading about it, and as they were describing how self-healing works in Cockroach database, I was like, oh, that's not exactly how I defined it in this post. These concepts tend to have different meanings in different domains. But Cockroach is very cool. It's something that our team's using, and it's something that I think is well suited for the grid, because it's a distributed database that is designed to be run in distinct geographic regions if you want to do that. And it has these self-healing capabilities. So it doesn't, as far as I can tell, it doesn't natively come with the ability to reserve new nodes and replicate onto those, but it has this feature where if one node somewhere goes down, the data is sharded, and any data shards that are lost on the node that goes down get rebuilt on any other nodes that are still up. So,
That is
and
so
this is
cool.
it's a newer
I've got it pulled up
implementation.
here. It's kind of I was actually this is just really cool. I've been working with the ISP config project, and it uses databases for independently hosting the websites. And the way I've been doing it is just running 2 or 3 database servers and setting them up in a multi-master configuration. But something like this takes a very solid chunk of the configuration of that out of the process, and it does it kind of as its basis.
Yeah, it appears to be a very low config kind of tool. You can just sort of spin it up. And so this to me is a neat example of the way that the space is heading, the larger space of web deployments, cloud focused technologies. You don't have to run Cockroach in the cloud, but it's kind of targeting an environment where you might have different deployments in different locations. But it's just an evolution of this kind of core software infrastructure that makes the internet run, and it's very well suited for an environment like the grid where you don't have these kinds of high assurances, right? That nodes are going to be around depending on which
Yeah,
kinds of
absolutely.
nodes you're looking at. So
I think that's definitely kind of what you're talking about with the future there. That's I was looking at as I've been deploying ISP config and doing it in full VMs and setting up each one. Basically, it's a VM per service. So you have a VM, you have 2 VMs for your mail servers, you have 2 VMs for your database servers, and they create their own mirrors there so that you can have data backup and that. But what would be just so cool is being able to containerize each of those services and have them deployable as micro VMs, where I can just select, hey, I want to set up an email service with 2 mail servers, and it just deploys those containers, and off you go. You just enter your domains, and I think that's kind of where we're heading. And stuff like this is just going to make that so much simpler.
for sure. So I'm excited to see more developments like this in the space, because there's still things like web hosting. I'm not aware of any projects that bring this kind of approach towards web servers. Probably there's someone out there working on something like this. This is what I see in the future is more of these kinds of softwares, whether they're developed by Threefold or by other people, where you just kind of deploy 3 of them, right? And then if one goes down, the other 2 take care of the load. And then yeah, in the grid, kind of to circle back, we can build these things so that if one goes down, the other 2 say, okay, we need to bring up another one, and then it rebalances to a set of 3. And once we're able to create deployments like this that are really simple for people to come and create for themselves, this would be really, really awesome, right? So you can say, oh, you want a website, you want automatic backups, you want, whatever it is, you can come and deploy it once, right? And you don't need to worry that something goes offline in the middle of the night and suddenly your data or your service is at risk, right? Then the system can heal itself. That's the frontier where we're headed in general. We're not there yet, but again, like since the grid Threefold is open source, open system, people can start building stuff like this just based on their imagination already.
Yeah, that's something I saw recently in the Terraform provider plugin GitHub, is that there is an example main.tf for a dynamic workload that actually allows you to just set what resources you want to reserve, and the grid will actually allow the Terraform plugin to pull what's available and then deploy those resources. And so that's kind of the next step in that as well. That's already kind of existent. So that's pretty cool.
I haven't seen that. I'll have to check it out.
Yeah, it's under, if you go into the examples and then resources section, it's under simple dynamic. It uses the grid scheduler service, And then you can lay out your resources. Here, I'll actually just pull that up here. I've already got it up on the high def recording screen, so might as well put it up on this one. So you've got this one here. So it's basically up here in the grid scheduler, you set what resources you're going to be used. And then come down here and it actually appears, and I haven't used this yet. I haven't been able to find anything that says how this actually works. But looking just at the configuration, it appears that what it's actually doing is creating a 2-node website hosting server that is actually kind of got the high availability. So it's got a gateway here that's working as a load balancer between the two servers and then running an HTTPS workload. So I'm not sure. I'm not going to say when this kind of functionality is going to be something that we see documentation on, but it's pretty cool to see the breadcrumb of it left in the repo. So.
Sweet. I'll have to go look at that.
We're kind of coming up towards
What's that written in? What code? What is that? What language is that?
This is HCL. So this is the hash. I'm not sure. I don't want to embarrass myself on
HDL.
Okay. HCL. Hotel Charlie Lima. It's HashiCorp coding language, I think, is what the C stands for. But basically, it's Terraform. So this is a Terraform configuration file that you would use in Terraform to deploy workloads on the grid.
Okay.
I think it's based on like YAML or something like that. So this is generally speaking, it's a markup language. So this is not a programming language. It's just a format that specifies a data structure.
Okay.
And you can do some things in Terraform that are kind of programming like. You can make some loops and things like this. But mostly the Terraform file is just about encoding data in a way that the computer can parse it and transform it into a data structure that it understands. So most of what you're seeing here are just sort of trees of things where you have this deployment resource and then you have some things that belong to it, like the VM, and the VM has some properties. So it's about defining what a deployment looks like and kind of this tree sort of structure where there's components and subcomponents and properties of.
Yeah, so the way I like to think of it is that the main.tfs are kind of the recipes to create a baked good, but your baked good is a VM. So when you put this together, what you're doing is you're telling it, hey, I'm using Terraform. We're connecting to the Threefold grid tech provider. You're telling it that there. And then you tell it, we're going to make a VM network. This is the IP we're going to use. And then you're telling it, we're going to attach 2 VMs to that network. And then we're telling it, I want you to give me this information back. So it's essentially just a recipe for deploying resources on the grid. And then you can save this into a directory and be able to redeploy that resource repeatedly and reproducibly.
That doesn't seem that complicated.
It's really not, but I will tell you that when I was learning to use Terraform, it took me like 3 months to finally get to the point where I understood what the heck this file did. So I don't fault anybody for being confused.
Well, when you throw it up on the screen and somebody looks at it for the first time, it looks like, what language is that? That's the first question I have.
So what's really cool,
the protocol.
Right. So let me break this down in a much more digestible format. So this section here establishes a house, right? So that's where your deployment's going to exist and how it's going to be built. This section then installs a router in that house and makes it so that all of your deployments have a way to connect to each other. This section then installs, essentially computers within that house and connects them to that network. And then this section is just you telling it, once you build all this, I want you to tell me this information about what you built. So it's super basic once you kind of understand what everything's doing.
Amazing.
Does anyone else? We're coming up on the hour here. So does anyone else have any additional questions?
As just want to say thanks again, guys. Really appreciate these calls. They're
Yeah,
very educational, very meaningful, and hope
I'm
there's a
super
light at
excited
the
to
end.
see how many people we had today because it's been the most attendance so far, and that just excites me. So I think maybe posting a reminder more than 15 minutes before it started probably helps this time. So I'm going to try to replicate that success and post some reminders. Maybe I'll post a reminder today about next week.
Yes.
And ask them to bring ideas too. You never know. You
Yeah.
know, don't. It's technical, but it's also user
Yeah, so I
looking
think
for you
that's
deployment
something I will.
ideas or something along those lines.
Yeah,
You know,
I'll put up a I'll post the invite link for this week today or for next week today. That way there's a full week of warning, and I don't just give you guys 15 minutes this time. And I'm looking at changing the title up a little bit because I do think that's been an opportunity is that people think they can only come in to talk about just the text nuts and bolts, but I guess technical discussion about Threefold as a whole, I guess would be a better picture. But yeah, I appreciate everybody coming, and we'll go ahead and close it up. Scott, thanks for joining.
Thanks.
thanks again, guys. Bye.
Thanks
Thanks
a
to
lot.
you all.